Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special presentation for Peace Week 2023. This program is produced by the Living Earth Movement. It has a simple little vision of increasing cooperation, minimizing conflict, minimizing the potential for war. Imagine that's pretty good, worthwhile cause. We have with us today the esteemed John B. Cobb Jr., the author of nearly 60 books, maybe over 60 books. There are so many of them coming out so fast, who can count them? We have Bruce Hanson, we have Robert Detrano. All four of us are members, active participants in the Living Earth Movement, especially in the Understanding China initiatives that Dr. Cobb will be speaking about momentarily. I'm going to switch over to speaker view now and welcome John Cobb.
Well, thank you very much. I thought that maybe what I could contribute, since I have no competence with any of these fancy programs that the rest of you are able to put on, I assure you, I don't mean to be putting them down. I'm just pure jealous. I just have to talk about what happened and why it happened and what is happening in a purely oral way. Okay, so I don't think that I am alone in feeling that the dangers to life on this planet have become acute, and that the threat to human life especially is acute. And even if it doesn't mean that every human being will die or that there will be no life left, even with the worst scenario, I kind of doubt that it would go that far. But it does mean an enormous setback in terms of human civilization and prospects for the future of the planet. And I just myself felt I had to do something. And then the second thing was that I'd gotten myself involved in China in a very positive and enjoyable way. And at the time, even just a few years ago, even though China was seen as a rival, and there were criticisms, certainly. It was called itself communist, and that's enough to ensure that it will be treated rather harshly by others. But nevertheless, the general atmosphere in the United States did not make China an enemy in a sharp sense. But more recently, President Bush began wearing a big button, China #1 enemy. And that's about as conspicuous a place to advertise something as you can get, that is the person of the president. And he was doing it himself. So we had to take seriously that we were living in a very precarious world, and that the two, at least from the point of view of one of the two great powers, the other was a mortal enemy. That's even more distressing. And it seemed to me maybe we could make some kind of presentation or discussion in which people would realize that enemies are our decision, and there's no need for China to be our enemy. China is our enemy because it is so successful at doing the same things that we are good at doing, maybe more successful than we, and therefore genuinely threatens our position in the world. But competitors, if they both compete in a fair way, a reasonably fair way, don't have to be enemies in the sense of really wanting to destroy each other. And I was afraid that the movement in the United States, just the feeling that people had about China as a result of what they were reading and so forth, was moving in the direction of at least being ready to accept the risk of war. And the one war the United States could win with China was a nuclear war. I confess this to me was a very frightening set of realizations. And I do not mean to suggest I know what to do about all this. But I thought at least maybe a few of us could get together and discuss whether there were ways in which we could counter the deteriorating relationship in some way. And so that's why this organization came into being. It was specifically about hoping that there would be a way of demonizing China. We weren't going to counter every bad or even false accusation, but it's the demonization of the people we want them, that our leaders want us to hate, so that they'll be free to do whatever they want to without any criticism. So that's why we came into being, and our actions have, the great majority of what we've done has been along those lines. Now, at the same time, we don't think that the United States and China are the only two countries that need to get along. We certainly broaden it out. And at the time that we were discussing what name to give ourselves, the people who had the broader emphasis were dominant. And so we have called ourselves the Living Earth Movement, with a strong emphasis upon encouraging nations to live together in harmony. And I'll say a little bit more about what I think that means. The word community is a very important one to me. It seems to me that when a group of people become a community, they're all better off. And I think there are many communities. We all participate in communities. And in a community, the other members are not looking about how to knock me down. They're looking for how we can work together successfully and helpfully to all of us. In a community, everyone feels some responsibility for everyone else. And everyone wants the whole group as a whole to succeed. Now, of course, there can also simultaneously be competition for leadership in that. So everything is always simplified when one describes it in the ways that I'm doing, but I think you understand what I mean. If you have a group of people who are primarily competitive, they are not a community. And in the past in Europe, as the church gave it a certain kind of unity, but as that broke down and nations took over, the nations were ends in themselves and understood to be in competition with each other. So competition was stronger as a description of what was happening between France and Germany and Spain and Portugal, and I could go on down the list, over a period of several centuries, than their cooperation. Now, one would occasionally find countries would work out a bargain and cooperate. I don't mean there was no cooperation, but this nationalism led to two world wars, as we all know, And at the end of the Second World War, it seemed that Europe had really learned its lesson, and they recognized that all the nations would be better off if they did not have to spend all that money fighting each other. And finally, they created a community, the European community. And since then, there have been no wars within Europe. If we think about it, we can see that if one can create a community among nations or whatever other level we're talking about, but nations have been the most important so far as peace is concerned. If we can create a community among nations so that they're working together for something more important than the primacy of any one of them, we have a real chance of making real progress. But if we have countries, each one of which is its own highest goal, has no purpose beyond itself and its own standing and status within the group, then you may not always be at war, but you're never really at peace. You're always thinking about who might attack us, who might try to do this, how can we prepare to prevent that? Maybe the best preparation is to attack them first. That kind of thinking is just, has been for centuries dominant in the relationship among the European countries. But now that they have created the European Union or the European community, it's gone. You're not afraid of them attacking each other. But of course, that does not solve the problem. The strong nation solved the problem of wars between feudal lords within those nations. But the only thing that can solve what should I say? Solve the global problem would be a global community. And thus far, I mean, the European community was a huge, amazing historical achievement. I don't want to put it down at all. But it inspired, both in Africa and in Latin America, movements toward communities of nations, and it opposed those aspirations. And the United States opposed them because the big corporations that play such a role will feel they have greater freedom of operation when they can deal with a lot of separate countries, none of which really have the ability to resist them. Whereas if Africa had become a union of nations or a community of nations, that's what I really want. Union can be an imperial union, and I'm interested in the European community, not a European empire. And so, and the same was what was attractive to Latin Americans and Africans. But what I'm suggesting is that the kind of thing we see is needed is not something that is not part of the real history of our time. It has happened in the case of Europe wonderfully. And if the Europeans would decide they have a wonderful model, they'd love to share it and could persuade Washington that that was the right way to go, it could become a model. We could have maybe half a dozen communities like the one. I don't want, I mean, working it out in detail is very interesting. I've done some of it, but that's not what we need to do right now. Right now, we just need to say, this is a topic one could think about without feeling this was sheer utopia nonsense. There would be serious support. Now, China and India are already comparable to these continental communities in population and also in economies and so forth. So I don't think they should be parts of anything larger than themselves, except the community, like everything else, can be wonderful and is wonderful in and of itself, but it can be used to dominate others. It can be used as the basis of imperial activities. And unfortunately, it often works both ways. The individual nations of Europe were quite remarkable communities, but the strength that they had as communities was over against the others. So that's why the phrase that I hold on to is communities of communities of communities. And of course, I could keep going, of communities. At least 6 levels, I think, can be distinguished as being a useful analysis. But it's the only way I can imagine a real peace. We may have an absence of war simply because nobody wants to be destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. And you can't be sure that you won't get bitten by the bug you let loose. But real peace means you care about each other. You want others to have it good. And you see that their benefit is not taking away from yours. They're being well off, not having to spend their money on armaments enables you to be well off and not have to spend your money on armaments. You can all benefit. So the idea of community is to be central to the Living Earth movement, with the recognition that communities can become centers of mutual destruction, and but they can also become agents of mutual betterment. We have enough hint of that we shouldn't give it up as sheer utopianism. It's the only way the world has a long future. So every step we can take in that direction. So we are concentrating on China and US because China and US cannot work together. There are many people who now comment they don't see much hope for the world. We have limited resources. If we spend them in preparing to kill each other, there won't be enough resources left to feed our grandchildren or to stop the whole process of global warming or any of the many things that need to be done. And I think there are lots of Americans who are perfectly able to talk with lots of Chinese and come up with excellent ideas. And I think some of them are now governments. I don't think that the idea of the governments of China and the United States getting together and saying, how can we both work? How can we cooperate? How can we help each other save this planet from becoming uninhabitable? I think that lots of people in lots of countries would say that's more important than the question of whether the US dominates or has to share power and domination with others. So, of course, I don't think that a handful of us here are going to save the world, but I think we at least can identify what it would take to save the world, and support activities that have a chance of saving the world, and ask for others. That's all, and it's very, very little in comparison with what needs to happen. But it's amazing sometimes just a little bit at the right time, at the right place, makes a real difference. And we can always hope for that.
Well,
I
thank you,
think,
John. And I'll share that in preparing for Peace Week, John has written another beautiful two-page document on community, the world vision, the vision of peace as a world of communities, and we will be sharing that on the website and perhaps in a series of booklets. Could you speak briefly, John, about the initiative that you started us on and that Robert and Bruce are both actively involved with, to help generate more understanding of China by writing these series of papers and then having dialogue? Could you speak briefly about that, please?
well, I have been really a little shocked. I mean, I don't think that I have lived this long and have a really very naive view of the wisdom and depth of thinking of most people. But nevertheless, people who just a couple of years ago would not have made a demonizing comment about China drop those comments now. In other words, the publicity has carried a long way. The newspapers, the radio, television, shape the minds of people, especially about things that they don't know about on a daily basis. And if they only read one type of literature, a type of literature that says obviously what the world needs is to be controlled by the United States and these countries that are trying to block that and prevent it and grab all the power for themselves are demons. They have nothing good to say if you think that way about the world. So it prepares the way for horrible consequences. So I thought maybe we could identify a dozen, maybe eventually 20 or more areas in which China is criticized. And I mean, of course, not careful, sober criticism that distinguishes what's good, what's bad, and all that. I mean, dismissive and demonizing critiques. And that we could write papers on those topics that are short. So it's not asking people to set aside a significant part of their day in order to read it, and things like that. But that would simply provide another more realistic and I think more believable account of what has actually happened. That maybe the sheer existence of some place easy to get to where people could check out what they're hearing when they've just heard that the president of China has done some more heinous thing. And that might influence thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, who knows? Maybe enough to actually make a difference. So I thought that the development of a set of papers on those topics where China is demonized regularly, mainly, I mean, they don't all have to be the same thing, would be a service to the cause of global peace. And we've been making progress. I think we have some very good papers. I think pretty soon we'll be able to go public with them. And Charles can probably help us interest some other organizations in making the public aware of the availability of these papers so that it could reach more people than those on our mailing list. So that's the project I have been most interested in. But of course, we have engaged in some other projects, and they're fine, and I'm not in the least wanting to put them down. But this is this is the one that I have been engaged in mainly.
We're going to talk a little bit about that, and I appreciate your mentioning that. Yes, we're patiently preparing for the perfect way, time, and place to publish them. And I even recently asked Kurt Johnson if Light on Light Press might be interested in helping us with the producing and/or the marketing, because as John Raymer said in a monthly meeting of the Living Earth Movement when he was participating, and John Cobb shared this vision and oversight, John Raymer came in and John Cobb said something, we hope that you will help us get these papers distributed. And John Raymer said, we're not just going to help you get them published and distributed, we're going to make sure the right people read them, right? So that's important. But we have a couple of minutes too. Could you speak about, we had a great session yesterday with Reverend Bonnie Tarwater introducing the Earth Crisis Support Groups, which are also featured on the Living Earth Movement website, being done primarily by her church. But we also have something else that you initiated, and that was the Youth Dialogue Sharing from the Heart. Could you speak briefly about that and how that's been going?
Well, I think it'd be good to get other people involved in doing this speaking, but if there's no one here who has been much involved, I'll be glad to say something.
Well, let me interject that they're here. Robert and Bruce are both going to be sharing some of their understanding of China, appreciation of China. And John Perkins is traveling. He is planning to come into the group about now. And I'm trying to schedule our agenda so that when he comes, we're ready for him, because he only has 15 minutes before he gets back in his car. And we do want to promote the the sharing from the heart. So please speak about that briefly.
Yes, well, I think that there are so many constituencies who we would love to find ways to communicate with. And one of them is just youth. If young adults from China and from the United States just get to know each other and learn from each other, that almost inevitably de-demonizes. And once they've de-demonized and get together, they'll find out they like some of each other's ethnic ways and they don't like others, and that's fine. We can be critical of each other. But we would also like to be a group that is thought of as a place where you tell the truth, and that you can tell the truth. When you tell the truth, you can go more deeply. And I think the young people who were involved understood that very well. So they have been having programs in which their real convictions could come out and be expressed and could be involved in interaction with each other. If you have a list of the topics that have been discussed, I think that would be
I can bring those up there on our website. Matthew Martin has just put a question in the chat that may be appropriate. Matthew, you want to come in and speak to that, or would you like me to read it? John is not seeing the chat.
Well, hey. Well, I'm at the beach, so I'm not going to hold this up a lot. But yeah, you can read the question, Charles. I think that kind of summarizes it. I guess I'll paraphrase it. I guess maybe is that we are given the fact that it's quite obvious to everyone, I'm sure, including the elites and everyone around, that having hundreds and thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at around the world at different nations is bad in so many ways. In other words, it's very threatening to people's security and feelings, for one, and number two, it's highly expensive. It's a vast economic cost to each nation that they could be doing other things with that money. And C, if they did explode or anything, not only all these people would die, but also we'd have a huge ecological catastrophe, and it'll probably be the end of the human race. So, I mean, all these things are very obvious. So my question then is, what do you, John, or other people think is the reason that these countries don't sit down and get on with it and agree to vastly reduce or eliminate all these weapons because of all the reasons I said. I mean, what's the value in holding them? I understand nuclear deterrence, and I don't believe that's partly a myth in my mind. But are you there?
Yeah, yes, we hear you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for the question. Let's let John answer that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just finish there. Is that I mean, nuclear deterrence is what we commonly hear. But even if you take that approach, you don't need thousands and hundreds for nuclear deterrence. You only need about 10 for each country, and that would be good enough deterrence. I mean, so come on. So what's the reason? What is the reason, do you guys think, that it's not getting on? And I'll just offer my own belief is I think it's the U.S. policy. I think they're the ones that are the problem. I don't think it's China or Russia. I think we think we can afford to do it, and we hurt their economy by doing this, and that satisfies the hegemony corporate elite that you're going to get better off in the world because of it. So what do you guys think?
Well, thank you. That's a perfect question, and you've asked the right question of the right person. Go ahead, John.
Well, I think that the United States got used to being the world's one supreme power in the years after World War II. Of course, the communist world never accepted our leadership, but anyone looking at the world as a whole saw that they were a minority holdout rather than a real competitor for world power. So we like the idea. And also the big corporations, the transnational corporations, they benefit from having the largest markets possible and being able to get the cheapest labor possible to produce things and to sell at the highest price that can be gotten. And so the transnational corporations want somebody to be able to make global decisions. And the US is the one possibility for that. So they support us in our desire to be the dominant power and be able to decide what resources will be available for use when and where globally. And so anyone who is not willing to go along with that becomes an enemy. And Russia is not willing to have its resources in Siberia controlled from outside of Russia. That is, Russia wants to be in control of its own resources. I don't think Russia has any ambition to conquer Europe or anything of that kind. But I do think they think they have a lot of wealth that belongs to them, and they want to keep it. They do not want somebody outside of Russia making fundamental decisions about it. So if the US can accept a pluralistic world in which Europe and the United States together dominate a great deal of it, but by no means all, then I don't think that there's any reason for anybody to go to war about it. I don't think that peace needs to be threatened. But if the United States considers anyone who will not subordinate itself to the transnational corporations and the United States, of the combination that I was suggesting, is a threat to world order and world peace as defined by the imperialists, it's a very, very frightening and disturbing situation. And I think preventing the American people from falling victim to a situation in which they will not resist even a nuclear war, if that's what it takes to realize our control, could be helpful. But if I think the great majority of people, when the questions are asked, do you think it would be better to have a relatively healthy planet with several different centers of power, or would it be better to have one planet in which most of it is devastated and there is only one military center? I think most people would choose the multi-power answer. Now, what I'm eager to do is to get the idea that a multipolar world could be a community of communities of communities of communities, in which every part of it was really trying to strengthen the whole. You don't have to transfer to the level of continents and continental unions and so forth the attitudes of competition. That's why, to me, the idea of communities provides a overall way of thinking that is not asking anybody to make a great sacrifice. It's just asking us to be willing to work with other people instead of against them.
It's about cooperation and understanding. And Matthew, one of the reasons that we're focusing on understanding is to educate the American population so that they can be available to be more aware, more educated when legislative initiatives need to be addressed, opposed, or supported, or initiated, or lobbied for. So thank you, John. Thank you, Matthew. We're still looking for John Perkins to join us at any particular time, but we have a couple of other beautiful presentations here. Robert, are you ready to share your presentation? Give me just a minute. I will bring you up. I'll highlight you. John Cobb can take a little bit of a rest and take notes to ask all these wonderful questions. Would you like to say anything before I bring up your document, realizing that we may be short on time?
Thank you very much, Charles. And I want to thank John Cobb for inviting me to join the Understanding China group. I enjoyed this enormously over the past months. My name's Robert Detrano. I'm a retired cardiology professor. I was a professor of cardiology at UCLA and UCI. So I spent about 20 years in China, mostly doing charity work in Yunnan province. So you can bring up my presentation now.
Mm-hmm.
I went to China several times before 2003, but I'll start with that visit, which was a visit to Beijing, the capital. I went there to lecture at the Beijing University Affiliate Hospital, and I was very happily surprised to find a vibrant modern city full of busy, hopeful, and very happy people. I also visited Chengdu, Xi'an, Chongqing, which were rising rapidly into prosperity. I wanted to stay a much longer time, and I wanted to be part of this new awakening, which resulted greatly because of the Deng Xiaoping economic reforms. UCLA granted me a one-year sabbatical to work at Fuwai Hospital in Beijing, so I returned to China in late 2004. In February of 2005, during the Spring Festival, the Chinese New Year, I traveled from Beijing to a place I had heard possessed clean air and agreeable weather, lacking in Beijing at the time. In that place, Yunnan province, I also found spiritual fulfillment. After arriving in Kunming City of Yunnan province, I bought a bicycle. During a bicycle voyage through the Yunnan countryside, I was invited to attend a prenuptial party for a rural minority girl who was marrying a boy from the city. The party was in a tiny, impoverished rural village very far off the beaten path on a dirt road. The home had no running water or electricity. To go to the bathroom, you had to go outside to a pit toilet. These are photos which are actually inadequate to describe the poverty that I found there. I'm sharing the banquet with my hosts on the upper left, and the right, you see how people bathe. Every day they bathe their feet. About once a week, everybody leaves the room and they bathe their whole bodies this way with bowls of water that they collect from a well. In the bottom, you see how they heat the house with a fire on the floor, which fills the house with smoke and also fills their lungs with smoke, and is a source of serious lung disease in this population. That night, I couldn't return to my hotel because my drivers got so drunk that they couldn't drive. So the host gave me a mat to sleep on in a small room, and I got up in the morning and I offered them some compensation, and they absolutely refused compensation because I had come with, it's a long story, but I had come with a relative of the boy who was marrying the girl from the home. So I was kind of family. When I finally returned to my comfortable apartment in Beijing, I donated most of my bank account. I founded a not-for-profit organization to give care to poor Chinese farmers. You can go down, you'll see this is at a fundraiser. I was at a fundraiser in San Pedro, California for the China-California Heart Watch, which was the organization I founded. And I married my landlady. And this is Shan Chen Chun, without whom I couldn't have done anything during the 20 years I was there. I'm eternally grateful to her. And I love her dearly for how much she helped the poor people of China. And I told my colleagues at the university I was going to Yunnan to care for the poor and research heart disease among Chinese farmers. During the next 18 years, I networked with various Christian NGOs and Chinese hospitals to create training programs for barefoot doctors and traveling clinics for poor residents of remote villages. I manned my classes and clinics with scores of volunteers from China, the United States, and other countries. Here are some photos of on the left of volunteers examining a patient, on the right, a volunteer measuring blood pressure and happy minority people. And down, you can go down, Charleston, the next one. I love this picture on the right. It's our youngest volunteer who is teaching some village doctors about high blood pressure, and the sign above his head, those of you who read Chinese will know, it says, eat less salt. So, because one of the treatments for high blood pressure is a low salt diet. On the left is my wife with one of our favorite patients who had congenital heart disease, which was incurable, and fortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago. The next picture on the left is one of our high blood pressure classes. When we taught village doctors, we used a method we used to call process learning. I don't know if it has anything to do with process philosophy because I don't know anything about process philosophy. And I'd like to talk more about it. Basically, you involve the students, you involve your class, and they teach each other, and then you break them into small groups and they teach each other again. On the right, that's not our team, but that's a group of Chinese surgeons in a large hospital, university hospital, operating on one of our patients with congenital heart disease, who is at that time was a girl of 12 and now has graduated university and is searching for a job. In 2019, I was awarded the Chinese Friendship Award by Premier Li Keqiang in Beijing for my work training rural obstetric doctors and nurses how to do proper heart exams of newborn babies. This is the Vice Premier giving me the award in Beijing around National Day in October in 2019. You can go down. During the time I spent in Yunnan, the Chinese government invested trillions of yuan into rebuilding and upgrading the rural medical care system, including infrastructure, building hospitals, clinics, training facilities, training personnel, and insurance, providing much better health insurance to rural residents. Today, there is really no need for charity doctors to deliver care and training that is now of much higher quality and quantity. Due to COVID, I spent most of the last 3 years in my cottage in Silverado, California. During a return home visit 1 month ago to my old home in Yunnan province, where I have a beautiful home overlooking a lake, I became very ill and had to be hospitalized in the new modern Fuwai Cardiovascular Hospital in Kunming. I received care there that I consider better than I could receive in California. I was in the hospital for a week. The total bill, which included the bill for medical, nursing services, all of the equipment that was used, the examinations, blood examinations, x-ray examinations, was a tiny fraction of what one would pay in Orange County. If I had been a resident and a citizen of China, my insurance would have covered about 80 to 90% of the bill. I'm so proud to have been part in what I consider a medical renaissance in the People's Republic of China. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening.
Well, thank you for sharing. I feel honored and privileged and blessed to be associated with you, and am even more grateful for your outstanding contributions and involvement and participation. And you know, who wouldn't appreciate and be moved by what you've shared? I bet John Cobb has something to share. John, you're muted.
I'm not muted right now. Is that right?
You're good. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm also very glad to have heard that story and certainly understand the depth of your love of the Chinese people, and of China as a country. They have, if we in the United States wanted to build up China in the imagination of the people, it would be easy to do. But since we want to put it down, that's also easy to do when you control the press. And so I think that a task of providing an alternative source of information is relevant. Whether we can do it on a sufficient scale to make any difference is another matter. But you can certainly speak with authority.
Well, and I have my Planet Blessed t-shirt on under my shirt, and I see you have your foundation's t-shirt on there, Robert. Is it still operating? Are you still able to accept donations from the world for that worthy cause?
Thank you very much. Yes, it is still operating. I am no longer a leader. I participate as a kind of consultant. It's now it's the present leadership is another American from Colorado who lives in Kunming, who is a entrepreneur, and he has a Korean American physician friend who works with him, and they do accept donations, and they use the donations to fund needed usually most of the people don't need funds for surgeries anymore because it's covered by the insurance. The insurance is much better, but sometimes they need some additional funds so the family can pay for a hotel room and travel to and from the hospital. We also have a help program for Burmese refugees who are in much worse shape, who are sent to hospitals in Thailand and in Burma. And we work with a Thai not-for-profit. They work with a not Thai. China Cal works with a Thai not-for-profit to help those Burmese refugees' children with heart disease. So anybody who wants to donate, just look up China California Heart Watch on Google. You'll come up with the website, and there you'll see how to donate there. Or you can send me an email. My email is Robert, my first name, at ChinaCal, ChinaCal.org.
I'll put your email in the chat. That's okay with you. And before we go on to Bruce, how about mentioning the title of your book as well?
Oh, I've written the book, which has really not directly related to the work I did in China, but it's my own ideas about moral philosophy. It's called Moral Science. It's behind me, and you can find that book on Amazon. It's a good book. I mean, I wrote it, so I think it's a good book. So,
well, I have a copy, and I'm looking forward to having
yeah,
you
you
read
know,
it. Let's see. Oops, I didn't get that in there. I will go in there and get that. Matthew has a question.
Hi, yeah. Well, let me pose it as a possibility or theory for. So, look, I think one of the problems with our relations with China and also with Russia might have to do with a psychological cause, a psychological cause of hubris in Americans, that we just consider ourselves and also morally superior to. But we always have to maintain
I lost him. He's
both military and economic powers. Oh, I said they're both military and economic powers, the powers of China. Do you still hear me?
now I hear you better.
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at is that it's a psychology in American thinking, generally speaking, of a kind of hubris that we're better and superior to other folks. And so what happens with that is that there's always going to be an enemy or someone else to compare ourselves with, and who better than Russia and China? And by the way, I don't think the Americans generally think Russian people or Chinese people are that much different or better, or less better, but I think it's the government. So looking at the government, we as Americans would always tend to think, well, not only are we superior to their form of government, but they're also evil. You know, they're the embodiment of the shadow, the evil ones, their government. So that's what we tend to do. It's a psychological shadow problem. What do you think about that?
Oh, is the question directed to me, Martin?
Oh, anybody there, yeah. Just interested.
I think many, if not most Americans, have essentially been brainwashed from the filtered propaganda they get, which originates from the large corporations and through the media, through the corporate media, the networks and the legacy media, to believe just what you said, that, you know, the American way is better, the American culture is better, we're children of the Enlightenment, and we still think, even though we don't want to admit it, it's in the back of many people's minds that the Chinese, oh, they're foreigners, and maybe a little bit close to savages. I mean, even some friends of mine who say that they love China and they like China, if you question them carefully, they still see Chinese somehow as inferior. So I think you're absolutely 100% correct. And I think one of the things that understanding China does do and can do and will do is, at least in some small way, try to mitigate and alleviate that problem.
Thank you, Robert. Robert and Bruce are two of the most prolific.
Let me just say, but the thing is, it's not
Ma-
about the
Ma-
people.
Matthew, sorry, we need to move on. We only have limited time, and we have.
Okay, I just gotta say, it's not really about the people that we're demonizing. It's about the governments, I think.
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you very much, Bruce. Guess what? It's your turn. Thank you for your patience. You are co-host, so you're in charge. Let's see some beautiful images of eco.
All right, I'll share my screen here. I'll see if this get it as large as I can. Can you see the picture?
Ah, that's a beautiful picture.
It's this is about I was recently in China for a conference and a process we'd call process philosophy academy with Chinese professors, their students, and other people who are at work in eco villages and in ecological civilization in China. And I hadn't been there since 2019, but I've been affiliated with China for quite a long time. My parents met in China. My mother is kind of a segue from Robert's. My mother was a nurse in Kunming for 4 years, from roughly 46 to 49, and where when they had medical detachment with 1 million women and children in a refugee camp there. And so I've been affiliated with a long time and taught. I'm a retired business professor, and I've taught MBA programs in China for probably over course of about 25 years at Wuhan University and Shanghai University, as well as bringing groups of students over. Anyway, so that's kind of a background. This trip was long awaited. It's been, COVID is a big change, and I know there are all kinds of national issues. Nations have a way of complicating things in some ways. But what I was really looking forward to on this trip, particularly, was a trip to Eco Village. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I went to Weijin Eco Village. This is about 2 hours by fast train from Shanghai south, and then about another hour and a half of driving to get to it, and a very remote road that would go through one-lane road that came in probably for maybe 5 miles or so from the highway. And this is the entrance to the village. And for me, it's kind of where community meets community. And I think I still have hopes of having a eco-village relationship between the United States and in China. And I live in Ojai, California, so we have permaculture and other things here, but it takes a little while to organize that. But anyway, this is a wonderful trip. I've been looking forward to it. And so this is in Weijin Eco Village. One of the interesting things about eco villages in China is that this is a okay, come here. There we go. There we go. Okay, get it going. This is another view of it. They grow a lot of crops. There are about 20 people who live in residence there. And they all work together as a co-op. And it reminded me very much of my experience of co-ops and back in the 1970s in the United States, where there would be a group of like-minded people on the same farm and would cooperate as a cooperative and live cooperatively. And so this is primarily rice fields as we're looking out here, but it's one of the interesting things about the Eco Village was that everything grows everywhere. and that's a little bit different than our monoculture or our organized gardens where you have neatly set rows. There are some. Here's a village, just a picture in front of the village sign with Jihe Wang, who introduced me and brought me there. And and then the woman just to my right is one of the leaders of the village, and she is a practicing lawyer, but has taken on moved to the eco villages. And so this is one of the common things where working professionals will move out, whether they have law degrees or doctorates or other types of degrees, will move out to these eco villages. And then on the far right is Ming Yang. She was my interpreter through a lot of things. She's one of the doctoral students and is actually from Kunming as well. It's a fascinating village. It's and it's only 9 years old. And they grow a little bit of everything and do a little bit of everything to make a life sustenance. Right in front of us, you can see one of their experiments with rammed earth foundations. This was built only 9 years ago, and already it's the experimentation is happening through a lot of these villages where they originally did concrete buildings, and they're gradually learning to become more and more organic over time, more and more with materials that are ecologically friendly. You can see this is part of an area. They have their own modern conveniences of cars. In the middle of this picture is the original part of the original setup. It was for this area. It was a village of some sort early on, pretty rough. You can see the power poles in the background, and it is very, really quite remote. One of the ways that they make a living is through education, and this is one of their this is their main classroom. They'll bring people in and talk about ecology and how they live, and so there's a lot of interaction between themselves and other people in China and other villages. To the right, you can see some cushions. One of the things that was remarkable, I visited 3 eco villages. This was the most traditional village. The others were probably a little more commercially oriented, but each one of them had a spiritual component, often Buddhist or Taoist. But that's what helped glue the people together, were these common beliefs and practices, as well as education, focus on education for how they made their living collectively, and then distributed money collectively as well. This is one of the dormitories or areas that they would live. You could have a small family in these small units. They actually built a lot of the foundations with those rocks in front. So it's very intensive, but it's also very experimental on their part. Here's one of their newest buildings, which is a tea house that they built with more traditional and more perhaps sustainable methods. And this is the inside with the as they're developing it. And this is their common restroom and bathroom facilities that they had. Again, this is the men's side of it, built with traditional bamboo timbers and structures. And they're gradually learning to build more sustainably, and more ancient methods are being employed. Jihe, as we're going down through it, there's quite a trail as it goes through. It's not made so much for human walking as I think I tripped up more than once going through these kind of areas, but it was more for nature. And so it's really a big emphasis on what was growing there, allowing the plants to grow where they needed to, and they're all over. This is part of the kitchen, big row. It's kind of a almost an industrial strength kitchen where they make the food. and this is part of this is their dining room, and in which they have the stoves for heating, and they, for part of their living that they make, they will take a lot of Jihe is looking at some wild rice that they grow and they sell. They also sell a lot of different herbal medicines, and they even make their own wine or alcohol. Up on the far left, you can see some bottles of that. They're not, and so they make their money through a lot of different methods. One of them is by drying herbs. And this is, they have a large drying facility where they'll bring those in. And here's the dehumidifier or drying oven, particularly for the medical herbs, but also spices and other things that they grow. This is a little bit more of a traditional stand of corn, but with some other plots. And in the far distance, you can see one of the original buildings from the old village that someone is still living in, or again living in. And as they look to become, again, more natural and more a part of nature. You can see that they use also some modern elements in it for structures as well as electronics, that they, and building materials. So it's a constant experimentation in kind of a postmodern development of very new materials, but also very ancient. This is actually the newest building on campus. And it was one of the individuals was able to make it for himself. And it reminds me a little bit of Henry David Thoreau's cottage on Walden, in the sense that it's made very economically, not necessarily comfortable, but adequate, and provides some good, greater integration with materials that will probably can easily decompose back into a natural state. This is one of the, we call them tuk-tuks in Thailand. But this kind of vehicle is pretty common here. It's been converted to use with electricity. And but life there is, it's fairly rugged, and it has high humidity, and living conditions aren't necessarily luxuriant, or they're rather, seems like they're rather sometimes difficult environments, but there's a great esprit de corps and a great enthusiasm for growing this and understanding and being a part of nature, without emphasis on materialism. So it's largely, this is a sample of the food. They fed us a porridge, and then there's okra and some other foods to eat. It tasted great. It was, it looked, they even remarked that it might look a little different to you, but it tastes good. And it really was. And so this is just our group that we're visiting as we were fed the food. It was really a neat trip. The people are really wonderful, very welcoming, great hosts. And I think it's this community of communities that John has talked about with the eco village that I think really strikes me. And it's something that we both have in common. I think when John was first writing, Is It Too Late? It was about the same time I was participating in co-ops in Minnesota and Wisconsin that were in many ways like this. So I think we have a great deal of commonality. And I think that's probably that's my talk.
Well, that was fabulous. You know, in the 70s and the 80s, I was the managing editor of Communities Magazine Institute of Cooperative Living. So I lived in intentional communities for 25 years. And the okra, if nothing else sold me, the okra sold me. So that is beautiful. And it occurs to me that what you and Robert have shared, both of them are as valuable and significant and substantial at helping understand China as any of the papers, I believe. You know, it just, I'm so deeply grateful that this non-agenda evolved in the way that it did, and it's being recorded, but I'll say it anyway. Too bad John Perkins didn't make it, but both of these, and of course, John Cobb's orientation, this is perfect. This will be on our, this will maybe one of the first of about 12 videos that I edit, get up on our Living Earth Movement website. So John Cobb and Robert, would you like to comment on that beautiful presentation that Bruce has shared, or even back to Robert's?
Yeah. Well, I immediately began wondering about the global eco-village movement. Are they very much aware of being part of something? And do they care what other people are doing, or are they just focused on what they're doing? Let other people learn from them if they want.
I think they're very globally aware. They obviously there are a lot of eco villages in China, and they're connected. But also they identify eco villages around the world, whether it's South America or in Europe.
So they are very, very much aware of being part of the global.
I think so, yeah. And they look forward to it, and they really cherish those kinds of connections. Yeah.
Yes.
John, we had invited Jaha to join us today. He wasn't able to, but he's participated because he was in some of the videos. And this is a good opportunity. John, I had put the photograph of the 2015 conference with you standing in the front of about 300 Chinese. And that kind of led to the Institute for Postmodern Development of China and Institute for Ecological Civilization. Could you speak a little bit about Jaha and his contributions and how that relates? And then Matthew, if we have time, we'll get back to your question.
I'll just correct one thing. The Institute for the Postmodern Development of China goes back about 20 years further than that.
Okay.
And the meeting that we were holding was the 10th international meeting, in other words, in China, or with the Chinese. We have been holding international meetings. So, but that was the first one in which was simply opened up to everybody.
And I believe Philip Clayton mentioned in one of his presentations that experience led to, or at least inspired some way, the Institute for Ecological Civilization. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think the 2015 meeting gave birth directly to two organizations. One of them was Philip Clayton. I mean, he could have done what he did without it, but I think he decided to do it as a result of that meeting. And then Eugene Shirley has created Pandopopulus. That Pandopopulus came into existence during the course of the planning, with the expectation that it would be the group that would carry on whatever was to be carried on after the meeting. But the meeting was scheduled at the time that the 10th Chinese meeting was being held. So it replaced the usual one.
And there's a correlation in the mission statement for Living Earth Movement and ecological civilization. Could you speak briefly to that?
Yes. So the various branches of the process movement, I think the process movement works well as a community of communities. So far as I have been able to judge, there's no real competition between the different forms of it. I mean, there are about 6 different organizations altogether, but each one is doing its own thing, and I think the rest of us wish it well. And if one of these organizations needs help from another one, we ask for it, and we almost always get it. And we're all stronger for being part of a family. Well, I mean, community is the word that we're using today, but, of organizations. But frankly, I was a little shocked when when I came just to feel a kind of that it was essential for me, just being myself, to somehow do something about this preparing for nuclear war with China. I just, I mean, maybe that was never on anybody's mind, but it was talked about. And the actions that were taken could easily have provoked it. So, in any case, my sense of urgency about doing something about that made me aware that none of the branches of the process movement were really dealing with international relations. And that since the future of what happens in every country depends on how they relate to other countries, there was something wrong with that. So it seemed like a whole, even in a very formal statement, but existentially at a time when the future of the world seemed very dim. I think if we can create activities that are enjoyable and fruitful in themselves, and that at the same time make it more likely that we will recognize one another's humanity and how other people can be helpful to us and how we can be helpful to them. And all of us together can find a way through extremely difficult problems that face us all in terms of climate and other things.
To get them
it's not
included,
impossible.
to include the IPDC in this presentation, could you speak briefly about that? I'm putting the websites for all these organizations in the chat, so they'll be available in the recording. So IPDC.
So IPDC?
Yeah, speak briefly about what they do.
IPDC is the I'm terrible about the Institute for the Postmodern Development of China. And this goes back to the 90s. And it was the result of the Chinese sending She to study the process work that was going on in Claremont. They became aware that Whitehead's philosophy had rich connections with the best of Chinese tradition, and could also, because even though they might be personally and individually find very adequate, the meaning of life as that is explained in traditional Chinese thought, they knew that for them to have a future on this planet, they had to do something about modern science and modern technology. These were the things that were really going to shape things. And Whitehead gave them a bridge from the depths of the Chinese tradition to the depths of what is being discovered about reality that even a decade ago, certainly 2 decades ago, was not widely recognized in the West. The West is becoming Eastern, and the East is becoming Western, and that's the way things should happen. And if they can happen in a context where both partners want the other one to gain, not by copying them, but by doing something creative with the new relationships. And to some extent, that's all happening. Of course, I keep making interjections about the limits, because when there are 1 billion people in China, and the vast majority of them don't know anything about us and don't care. I mean, why should they? I'm not complaining. I just mean I realize that we have always operated in a fringe. I think sometimes a very fruitful place to be. So I'm not apologizing about that. And occasionally something that happens at the fringe catches on and becomes mainstream. And I think that could happen.
Okay, we're close on time. Matthew, please keep it brief. And then Bruce, you have something, and Robert, I will see if I can capture that image. Matthew.
Yeah, hi. What's revealing to me with this is that it's such a great way of peacemaking and peace building between the Chinese people and American people, at least in the ecological movement. With eco villages, of course, that's a kind of a small niche, but you branch it out into the whole ecological movements that we have, including climate change, climate solutions. We need more dialogue between the intellectuals, the folks who actually know something about this and are doing it in China. I just see it as a wonderful, optimistic example of how we can create more peace building between at least the ecological people of America and the ecologically minded, enlightened people of China. You see what I mean? So that's all.
That's great. Thank you for bringing that in. I appreciate that. Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to reaffirm, just to reinforce what John Cobb has been saying. When I was in China, I was just amazed at the depth of connection that postmodern identification has had in China. They have a huge history that does connect, and they see the connection, and it's very vibrant activity right now that's going on. So it's not just a small thing; it's a very big thing. And I also realized why it's difficult in the United States, because when we think of ancient connections, we may go back to the Greeks or something like that, but we don't feel like we have some of the ancient connections that they do in China. So I think we can learn a lot. My mom was very formative when I was growing up, and recognized that the pragmatic commonality between U.S. and Chinese peoples, that we're both very pragmatic peoples. And I think that's one thing that can bind us together, is that possibility of this, of understanding what real postmodern thinking and living might be like. And so Jiher and May have been just wonderful and amazing, but I'm always impressed by the depth of the connection that is, and what is going on. I think it's tremendous what's going on in China. And Jiher and May and with John's well-earned authority in this whole field, and the respect that he has in China has really made a big difference. I think it's great.
Jiher and May are currently in China. May has only been there for one day. She's gone for a month. And they are enthusiastic about the way things feel, the enthusiasm people have for what they're doing, and wanting to be involved. But it's more than being involved, that people are inspired to do their own thing. The eco village is the creation of Chinese. We didn't, Jiher didn't play, I don't think, any role, except that he talked about possibilities, and other people said, okay, well, let's do it. They did it. It's very, very spontaneous in many ways. And it's wonderful to know that can happen. And that's what we think process ought to be like everywhere. We're not stuck in the past, but we're not fighting the past. We're not feeling it's necessary to free ourselves from the past. We use the past as a basis of taking the next step. And when we do that, we feel we're doing something freely.
It is very much that way. I think that's wonderful, John. I'm really impressed. When I went back this time, I was very encouraged.
Great.
Robert has asked me to share an image. Let me see if I can bring that up. Are you seeing it?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Charles. And thank you very much, Bruce. Your presentation was super and your photographs were very beautiful. This is a remark about your presentation and the eco village that you visited, and also a question to you or to anybody in the group who knows. This is a photo I took while I was on on my recent trip to China about a month ago. My wife and I, we decided we would try to walk around our lake. This is our lake.
Oh, wow.
Is in Dali, where my home is, and I didn't make it. I only made it about a third of the way around, but I took a lot of photographs. And around our lake, the government has funded and built what they call an ecological region. It's kind of like stretches back about a quarter of a mile, about 500 meters to a kilometer from the edge of the lake to the farmlands, which are beyond it. And it's a ecologically protected region. No motor traffic is allowed, no cars, no motorcycles, only bicycles and pedestrian traffic is allowed. So it's a great place to walk around the lake. And this is, I think, a similar project, on the same idea as the Eco Village. And I don't know how many places there are like this in China, because this is something which I never looked into. So I was wondering if, Bruce, if you know, because, it's nice that you can go to an Eco Village, but are there just very few of these types of places, or like this ecological region around our lake? Or is this a massive investment by China to build what they calling the ecological civilization?
Well, I think I thank Robbie. I was at Thousand Island Lake, which is a huge reservoir, a man-made reservoir, but much of it was designated as preserve for ecological retention and awareness. And in fact, the building that we were in was constructed fairly recently as a retirement village, but was taken out of operation because it did not have adequate facilities for waste disposal. I think it wasn't entirely clear, but anyway, when the country gets behind, that's one advantage, I think, of the political structure of China. Once they get behind an initiative, it happens, and at a very large degree, and very quickly, and quite thoroughly. And if that blends together with these local initiatives, which actually are throughout China, there are a lot of eco villages that are developing, and it's not just self-contained villages, but they're also blends of commercial farming, meaning farming that is maybe owned by individuals that produce food, high quality food for many. So it's really developing a lot. I'm really quite impressed at how thoroughly they've been kind of held this ethos. It's and your experience on the lake was very true with where I was at, that much of the lake itself was in preservation, and they controlled what activities could go on in it. And if there anything that was detrimental, it would be shut down almost immediately, which is, rather than California, it's going to be 2040 before we get our wells capped in the middle of the valley. This would have happened in a snap in China. So, I mean, there's some real advantages to the way they've organized things that way. But there is a lot of local enthusiasm, and the people that I met were really on charge about it. They're really quite excited about it. I ran into an architect who is designing ancient construction methods on new buildings, and so it's got a great cultural hook as well. That's really neat with the Great Lakes, because it seems to be happening quite often. Well, it's not universal the way you'd like it to be, maybe, but I would like it to be. But it's significant. It's occurring at a significant rate throughout China.
China can lead the world in a good many ways. If it doesn't have to spend its time defending itself against the United States.
And it has its own political issues to work through too. I mean, just as any nation state will have, and so forth. I think and so some of it's kind of giving it a break in the sense that they don't have everything solved either.
Of course.
They're working on a lot of stuff, and it's pretty easy to take pot shots at any country, I think.
Oh yeah.
I have put a number of things in the chat. I put the cover of Ecological Civilization from Emergency to Emergence by David Corton, one of the other members of our original organizing committee for Living Earth Movement. And I'm about to put a copy of the PDF in there. Is International Cooperation Possible? Which Jeff Wells, also one of the original organizing committee members, helped edit with John Cobb. And those are all those resources are available on the Living Earth Movement website. And soon these stories and presentations from Robert and Bruce will be there as well. So John Cobb, how about some closing remarks while I put the last couple of links in the chat?
Well, it may be that if we do something like this again, we need to be sure that we got somebody there who's going to raise the tough questions about China. What mistakes it's making, in our view. What is unsustainable about its activities. You know, was it, as you were saying, it's not perfect. I think it's open to conversation about those matters. If it's a conversation with people who want to cooperate with them and solving them, rather than a conversation with people who just want to blast them. It's hard to carry on conversations when the other side has no interest in anything except how they can undermine you. So.
Well, as you recall, the part of the Understanding China program is the dialogues that come after the papers are published. So we have ongoing opportunities for exactly what you just described.
Exactly.
Imagine that. So we're on a roll, we're making progress, even though Robert's frustrated with me because we haven't published it and gotten, the gold star yet, but we're getting there. And after we get past this beautiful opportunity with Peace Week, that and the Holo Movement Project with John Cobb's book about Earthisms and the Earthist Society, those are my priorities for the fall, along with the fundraising campaign, so we can keep on keeping on. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this incredible opportunity to share this information with you. Thank you, John B. Cobb Jr. Thank you, Bruce.
And I think we all need to say thank you to Charles, because without his self-giving efforts and labor and wisdom, we wouldn't be anywhere now. So thank you.
Totally agree. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for all your work.
Well, and I was thanking you, Robert, when John came in and thanked me, and I've got to thank then John and all the other donors who have helped make it possible for me to get a little subsistence salary this year. And it's such a privilege. And if I was earning what I used to earn for most of the years that I was in civil service, I'd just be paying myself to do this. But it's a joy, really. It's a privilege, and the world is going to find it.
I don't want to mention this. Maybe we should get you a raise.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, I'm available. I'll send you, you can even donate stock or Bitcoin. We're available. Well, thank you all. Bless you. We are a blessing. Have a wonderful, blessed weekend. Thank you. Glad to see that Bruce and Robert are healed. And John, too. I'm glad you're well. Blessings all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.